There's a certain stillness that surrounds a wedding day. It's the kind of stillness filled with hope. The soft silence between the vows, the whispered, "I love you," before the first dance. The breath you take before stepping into the rest of your life. For Alyssa Monroe, a 27-year-old nurse from Houston, that moment had finally come. Dressed in white, she smiled at the man waiting for her at the altar, unaware that every second was counting down to something she could never imagine. Hours later, she would send a simple text to her sister, "I'm so happy." Minutes after that, her body would be discovered in a hotel room just blocks away from the celebration. No witnesses, no forced entry, no clear answers, just a wedding gown folded neatly on a chair, and a husband with too many versions of what happened that night. Houston, Texas, late spring, the kind of warmth that lingers just after sunset. On this day, laughter floated through the air like confetti, mixing with the clink of champagne glasses and the shuffle of soft footsteps on a garden path. The setting, a tucked-away chapel on the edge of the city, draped in white roses and filled with friends, family, and the kind of joy that only comes once in a lifetime. Alyssa Monroe stood at the center of it all, a 27-year-old pediatric nurse with eyes that always seemed to be smiling, and a heart everyone said was made for healing. She had found love, or at least, she believed she had. The man she married that evening, Derek Langston, was reserved and polite, the kind of man who gave just enough to be trusted, but never too much to be questioned. He worked in IT, rarely raised his voice, always said the right things. To many they looked perfect. To some, they looked too perfect. The reception ended around 10:30 p.m. Guests filtered out under dim lanterns and the distant hum of the freeway. The couple left hand in hand, bound for their honeymoon suite at the Magnolia Grand, a high-rise hotel tucked in downtown, known more for its luxury than its history. Alyssa texted her sister Nicole one final time before turning in for the night, "I'm so happy." By sunrise, Nicole's phone would be ringing, and on the other end of that call, the kind of silence no one ever prepares for. What happened inside that hotel room would raise questions that no one, not her family, not the guests, not even the investigators, was ready to answer, because when it came to Alyssa's final hours, very little made sense. Texas has a long memory, and buried within that memory are stories that stretch far beyond dusty highways and city skylines. Stories of families torn apart, of questions left unanswered, of crimes that made national headlines for all the wrong reasons. In 1998, the brutal dragging death of James Byrd Jr. shocked Jasper and the nation. In 2001, Andrea Yates drowned her 5 children in a quiet Houston suburb, prompting a national conversation on mental health and justice. And in 2012, the murder of Michelle Warner by her boyfriend in front of their child, recorded and confessed on national television, left viewers horrified. These aren't just headlines. These are lives, names, stories with details too disturbing to forget. And though decades pass and cities change, one thing remains constant. When something like this happens in Texas, people don't just talk. They remember. Alyssa Monroe's case may not have drawn the same national spotlight, not yet. But the signs were there. The pattern was familiar, and in the end, the questions surrounding her death would feel all too similar to those that came before. If you're still watching, ask yourself, what does justice really look like? What warning signs go unnoticed until it's too late? And how many more cases like this are out there, quietly hidden behind closed doors? If stories like this matter to you, if you believe the details deserve to be told, subscribe to this channel. Like the video so more people see Alyssa's name. And leave a comment below. Let us know you're listening. Let us know you're still here. Because sometimes the only way the truth gets heard is when enough of us refuse to stay silent. Alyssa Monroe was the kind of person who made everyone around her feel like they were seen, heard, and understood. As a pediatric nurse, she dedicated her life to children, those whose lives had just begun, and those who were fighting to hold on to the moments that mattered most. Her heart was full, not just of compassion, but of hope. And yet on the surface there was something delicate about her that no one seemed to notice. She had built a life that appeared perfect to outsiders, friends, family, co-workers, all of them sure that she was at peace, sure that she had found her place in the world. But even the most polished exteriors can conceal cracks that run deeper than anyone expects. Alyssa had a circle of friends who swore she was the kind of person who always put others first. But those closest to her knew that there were times when she would pull away, retreating into herself. There were moments before the wedding when she seemed uncertain, quietly wrestling with doubts that only those who knew her best would recognize. Nicole, her sister and maid of honor, had seen it too. At times, Alyssa had said things that seemed off, like questions about Derek, her soon-to-be husband. But even in those moments of hesitation, Alyssa never faltered in her commitment to the man she was about to marry. Or so it appeared. The night before her wedding, Alyssa seemed to have put all her doubts aside. She slipped into her wedding dress with a smile that was pure, one that only a bride could wear. She danced with her father, laughed with friends, and whispered promises with Derek. But just before she closed her eyes, she reached for her phone, sending a simple message to her sister. "I'm so happy," as if reassuring herself, or maybe seeking some kind of validation. That was the last thing Alyssa Monroe would ever say to anyone. Nicole would never forget the sound of her phone ringing the next morning, the kind of call that no one ever expects, the kind of call that changes everything. Alyssa was gone, just like that. No more texts, no more laughter, no more, "I'm so happy," only silence. Derek Langston was the kind of man who knew how to charm a room. An entrepreneur by trade, he worked in IT security, a quiet, behind-the-scenes kind of job that gave him the perfect cover for someone who liked to keep things in the shadows. He'd been the picture of the modern-day gentleman, polite, respectful, even playful. To Alyssa, he was everything she had hoped for in a partner. But behind the polished exterior of the successful, tech-savvy man she married, there were cracks that only those closest to him could see. Nicole, Alyssa's sister, started noticing the changes long before the wedding. Derek, once outgoing and easygoing, had started becoming more reserved, more protective. To some, it seemed like love. To others, it seemed like control. Nicole described the shift as subtle, but unmistakable. Derek's demands on Alyssa's time grew stronger, his interactions more possessive. He began questioning where she'd been, who she'd been with, even what she wore. At first, Alyssa brushed it off as typical pre-wedding stress, but her sister wasn't convinced. It wasn't like him. Nicole said, remembering how Derek's once warm demeanor had started to feel heavy. But perhaps even more troubling were the things that Alyssa didn't know. Derek had a side that no one knew about, a financial side full of secrets. It was only after Alyssa's death that her family uncovered the truth. Derek had been hiding debts, mounting bills, and financial troubles that he had kept from everyone, even Alyssa. He had borrowed large sums of money he couldn't repay. And to make matters worse, he had been hiding it all under a carefully crafted illusion of success. What was it that made Derek so desperate to keep up appearances? What lengths would he go to maintain his facade? The reception ended just after 10:30 p.m. Guests waved goodbye. The music faded into the distance, and the newlyweds made their way to the hotel. The Magnolia Grand, an upscale luxury hotel in downtown Houston. Derek and Alyssa checked in together, their hands intertwined, faces lit up by smiles that could have been mistaken for the beginning of a fairy tale. A far cry from what would soon unfold. Security footage from the hotel lobby shows the couple walking in, barely noticeable in the flurry of a typical late-night check-in. Derek held Alyssa's hand tightly, and despite the crowd around them, they seemed in their own world, moving toward the elevators with a calmness that, in retrospect, would seem almost eerie. At 11:42 p.m., Alyssa sent her sister Nicole a text. A simple message, "I'm so happy." It was just a few words, a quick note to her sister before the newlyweds retired for the night. But that would be the last time anyone would hear from her. No more texts, no more calls, no more updates, just a silence that no one could have predicted. Hours later, at 3:17 a.m., Derek Langston made a call to the front desk. His voice was panicked, frantic. He claimed Alyssa wasn't breathing. The operator rushed to send help, but by the time emergency responders arrived, it was too late. Alyssa Monroe was gone. Just hours before, she had been smiling, filled with joy, sending texts about her happiness. Now the life that had seemed so full of promise was reduced to a single phone call from the man who had once promised to protect her. When police arrived at the Magnolia Grand Hotel just before dawn, they found Alyssa Monroe's body lying unresponsive on the bed. The scene was calm. Too calm. The room showed no signs of a struggle. No broken furniture, no overturned belongings, no shattered glass. Just a quiet, still hotel room, a place where, according to Derek, the night should have ended peacefully. Alyssa's body was on the bed, her arms gently resting by her sides, her expression soft, almost as though she were simply sleeping. Her wedding gown, now creased from where she had lain, was neatly folded on a nearby chair, almost as if someone had taken care to arrange it. The room was immaculate, too immaculate, considering the chaos that would usually follow such a devastating moment. No signs of forced entry, no broken locks or windows, no indication that someone had intruded, just a perfect room, and a woman who, hours before, had sent a text full of life. Derek, still visibly shaken, told the officers that Alyssa had complained of feeling dizzy after they had arrived in the room. She had simply gone to bed, he said, claiming he hadn't thought much of it. He had assumed she was just tired, the stress of the wedding day taking its toll, but something in his voice didn't quite match the calm of the scene. How could everything seem so perfect? The room, the bed, even Alyssa herself, if this was truly just a simple case of fatigue. The officers took down Derek's statement and began their investigation, but one thing was already clear. Nothing about the scene added up. Was this really just a tragic accident? Or was there more to the story than Derek was willing to admit? The investigation was only beginning, but it wasn't long before authorities would uncover something that Derek had failed to mention. Something that would shatter his version of what happened that night and change everything. Detective Marcus Shields had seen his fair share of tragic deaths, but there was something about the case of Alyssa Monroe that felt different. Something that gnawed at him from the moment he stepped into the Magnolia Grand Hotel. A veteran investigator with the Houston Homicide Unit, Shields was known for his ability to uncover the hidden truths behind cases that others overlooked. He had built his reputation on solving the most puzzling and often darkest of cases, many of them involving domestic abuse that had gone unnoticed until it was too late. And this case, in his gut, felt all too familiar. From the start, Detective Shields noted Derek Langston's behavior as unusual. In fact, it stood out to him in a way he couldn't ignore. As he questioned Derek about the events of that night, the young groom appeared distressed, but there was something cold in his eyes, a detachment, almost like he was going through the motions of grief rather than truly feeling it. Derek's responses were short, rehearsed. He didn't seem to be grasping the gravity of the situation, despite being the last person to see Alyssa alive. Shields, who had spent years dealing with victims of domestic violence, knew how to read the subtle cues, the shifts in tone, the body language that often betrayed the truth. Derek's nervous energy didn't match the anguish one might expect from someone who had just lost their wife. Instead of racked with emotion, Derek seemed oddly composed. His story was coherent, but lacked the rawness of someone truly grieving. In Shields' mind, it raised the first of many red flags. It was a gut feeling, the kind Shields had learned to trust over the years. But he knew one thing for sure: Derek Langston was hiding something. The autopsy results came back a few days later, and they shattered the fragile narrative Derek had built around Alyssa's death. The official cause of death: blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. This wasn't a simple case of someone passing out from exhaustion or a couple of glasses of wine too many. Alyssa had been struck with force, a deliberate blow that had left a distinct injury. But that wasn't all the medical examiner found. There were subtle bruises around Alyssa's wrists, faint but unmistakable signs of a struggle, as if she had tried to fight off an attacker, to escape from someone who had held her down. But who could have done this to her? If it had been a tragic accident, as Derek had claimed, then why the bruising? Why the head trauma? Why had Alyssa been restrained, even for just a brief moment? These were questions that Derek couldn't answer, no matter how hard he tried to explain. But the autopsy didn't end there. Toxicology reports showed traces of sleeping pills in Alyssa's system, but the levels were non-lethal, barely enough to put her to sleep, let alone cause death. There was no overdose, no fatal dosage, just enough to suggest that she had been sedated, but not enough to explain the fatal injury to her skull. Detective Shields couldn't help but ask the question, if it was an accident, why the head trauma? Why the wrist marks? The pieces weren't fitting together. Derek's story was beginning to unravel, but the question remained: what was he hiding? As the investigation continued to unfold, more and more inconsistencies began to emerge. A tip came in, completely anonymous, suggesting that Derek Langston had been texting another woman in the days leading up to the wedding. The woman claimed to have been in frequent contact with Derek, their relationship seemingly more than just platonic. At first, Derek denied it, claiming it was just a misunderstanding, but the story was starting to unravel. Was there someone else in Derek's life? Was he keeping a secret from Melissa? And if so, what did that mean for his connection to her death? Then, just when it seemed like Derek might finally crack, another surprise turned up. Hotel surveillance footage revealed something shocking. At 2:40 a.m., just hours after Alyssa had been found unresponsive, Derek was seen leaving the hotel. His destination? Unknown. But he was alone. No one had seen him leave before, and no one had noticed his absence. When confronted with this new evidence, Derek explained his movements. "I was just getting ice," he told the police. Ice. But it seemed like a flimsy excuse, one that didn't quite match up with the time he had spent outside the room, or the fact that he hadn't mentioned leaving at all in his earlier statement. Was he really just getting ice? Or was he doing something else? Something that didn't fit the carefully crafted image of the grieving husband. As more pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Detective Shields couldn't help but feel the tension mounting. Every new detail only raised more questions. Derek's story was becoming more and more complicated, but one thing was certain. Someone was lying. And the truth was out there, hidden just beneath the surface. The more the investigation uncovered, the clearer it became that Alyssa had been struggling in the days leading up to her wedding. Forensic experts combed through her phone, retrieving every search, every text, and every digital footprint. What they found shocked everyone. 2 weeks before the wedding, Alyssa had searched how to cancel a wedding. The search was short, barely a few seconds in length, but the implications were undeniable. It seemed as though Alyssa had doubts. Doubts she never shared with anyone but herself. What had been going on in her mind in the days leading up to the wedding? Had she really been ready to spend the rest of her life with Derek? As investigators continued to dig into Derek's digital life, they uncovered more startling evidence. A forensic recovery of deleted texts between Derek and his ex revealed a side of him that didn't align with the man he had portrayed to Alyssa or to the police. His ex seemed to have knowledge of things Derek had never mentioned, like his financial troubles and his controlling nature. It painted a very different picture of the man Alyssa had married. But it wasn't just Derek's past that was coming to light. Nicole, Alyssa's sister, revealed a chilling conversation she'd had with her just days before the wedding. "I'm doing this for love," Alyssa had told her, her voice heavy with emotion. "He'll change." Those words hung in the air, now carrying an unbearable weight. Alyssa had seen the potential in Derek, the man she had fallen in love with, the man she had hoped would change. But in the end, had she been wrong? The digital trail was leading investigators down a dark path, and the evidence was beginning to speak louder than Derek ever could. But there was one last piece of evidence that would seal his fate, something he had forgotten to delete, and it would be the key to unraveling the truth. After weeks of investigation, questioning, and mounting suspicion, the breakthrough finally came. It was a Tuesday morning when Derek Langston was arrested at his office in downtown Houston. He was caught off guard, his face pale with disbelief as officers approached him. For the past several days, Derek had been the subject of an intense investigation, but he had continued to deny any wrongdoing. Despite the growing mountain of evidence, the autopsy results, the incriminating text messages, the surveillance footage, Derek maintained his innocence. "I loved my wife," he insisted, his voice shaking as he was escorted out of his office in handcuffs. He repeated the same words over and over, as if convincing himself more than anyone else. "I loved her. I didn't do this." But no one was listening anymore. The case was clear. The evidence is too overwhelming to ignore. Derek Langston had been arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The brutal death of his wife, Alyssa Monroe, a crime that had stunned the city of Houston and left a community mourning the loss of a woman so full of life. As Derek was led into the back of the police car, the question everyone wanted answered hung in the air. What could have driven him to kill the woman he had once promised to love forever? Was it love, or something far darker? The final blow to Derek Langston's defense came from the forensic team. While he had tried to deny everything, claiming he loved Alyssa and would never harm her, the physical evidence told a different story. A bombshell discovery came when forensic experts revealed they had found Derek's fingerprints on the lamp used as the blunt object that had killed Alyssa. The lamp, which had been knocked over in the chaos of the hotel room, was the very item that had caused the fatal blow to the back of her skull. The blood spatter found at the scene matched the angle of impact, the perfect alignment to the lamp's position and the wound on Alyssa's head. It was clear that this had not been an accident. The lamp had been used deliberately, with enough force to kill. But there was one more piece of damning evidence. Investigators recovered a text message Derek had sent to a friend the night before the wedding. The words chilled everyone who read them. "If she walks out on me, she'll regret it." The message was a stark reminder of the tension in their relationship, the control Derek had been exerting over Alyssa, and the unspoken threat that had loomed behind closed doors. Derek had tried to paint himself as the grieving husband, but the evidence, the fingerprints, the blood spatter, the message, painted a very different picture. Alyssa's death was no longer just a mystery. It was a carefully planned and executed crime. The courtroom was packed as Derek Langston stood trial for the murder of his wife, Alyssa Monroe. Family members, friends, and even strangers filled the seats, all eager to see justice served. On one side, Alyssa's family sat in silence, their faces marked by grief and disbelief. On the other hand, Derek remained calm, almost distant, as he faced the charges against him. Throughout the trial, Derek showed no remorse. He avoided making eye contact with Alyssa's family, his cold demeanor standing in stark contrast to the pain and heartbreak in the eyes of those who had loved Alyssa. The prosecution presented the evidence: the fingerprints on the lamp, the blood spatter, the threatening text messages, and slowly, methodically, they dismantled Derek's defense. His claims of innocence fell apart as the jury was confronted with the undeniable truth. The defense tried to paint Derek as a man caught in a moment of passion, but the facts of the case told a much darker story. There was no moment of rage, no outburst. There was only premeditation. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury finally reached their verdict: guilty. Derek Langston was found guilty of second-degree murder. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence as the verdict was read aloud, a moment of justice that felt long overdue. Derek was sentenced to 45 years to life in prison. His life, once filled with promise and opportunity, had come to a crashing halt. As he was escorted out of the courtroom, he once again avoided looking at Alyssa's family, who were left to grapple with the loss of their beloved daughter, sister, and friend. For them, there would be no closure. There was no undoing the pain that Derek's actions had caused. In the end, justice had been served. But the scars would remain, a constant reminder of the woman who had lost her life at the hands of the one person she had trusted most. As the dust settled on Derek Langston's trial, the true emotional weight of the case began to hit home. Alyssa's family, especially her sister Nicole, were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. In court, Nicole delivered a powerful victim impact statement, her voice trembling but strong as she addressed the judge. She spoke not just for herself, but for the loss of a sister, a friend, and a woman who had touched so many lives. Alyssa was more than a victim, Nicole said, her eyes red with tears. She was a fighter, she was a survivor, and she deserved more than this. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a warning to everyone who thinks they are safe from the people they love most. The statement resonated with everyone in the courtroom and beyond. The shock of Alyssa's death, a woman so full of life, so full of hope, rippled throughout Houston and beyond. For those who had followed the case, it was a stark reminder of how easily the brightest futures could be snuffed out in an instant. It was a tragedy, yes, but it was also a wake-up call. A wake-up call to the warning signs of abuse that so often go unnoticed until it's too late. In the aftermath, Alyssa's family worked tirelessly to keep her memory alive, launching a fundraiser in her name for survivors of domestic violence. It was a small consolation, but it allowed others who had been affected by similar circumstances to find support and healing. But there was one thing that no one could forget: the last message Alyssa had ever sent, a single text sent to her sister just hours before her death. "I'm so happy." That message, once filled with joy and love, now became a haunting memory. It was the last piece of Alyssa that would forever remain frozen in time. A message of hope, a message of happiness, just moments before her world came crashing down. And so, the story of Alyssa Monroe became more than just a case of domestic violence. It became a symbol of what happens when things are ignored, when love is twisted into control, and when a message of joy is forever frozen in time, as a reminder of what could have been. Was this always his plan, or did he just snap? What do you think? Was Derek's violence a carefully calculated act, or did something in him break that night? And think about this. What would you have done if your sister had doubts before the wedding? Would you have pushed her to reconsider, or would you have trusted that everything would work out? Drop a heart in the comments if this story left you speechless, because the truth is, there are so many questions still left unanswered. We may never fully understand why Derek did what he did, but we can learn from Alyssa's story. For more haunting true crime stories, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We drop a new case every week, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's next.